Three, two, one. Hi, hello, and welcome to yet another expat. This is episode number 8. I am your host, Hermes, and this episode is a bit of a patchwork between two different recordings. It's the first time I'm doing this, so let's see how it goes. My skills have developed going through all of the different ways of editing, as you may have noticed, not by the quality or the results, but by me talking about it. Also, for those who haven't seen, this podcast has some artwork that I've been putting on. Each different episode has a different Photoshop cover, which puts this more or less useless skill in 2024 with AI image editing coming in our lives. But I learned Photoshop when I was 16 after a leg surgery that put me in a chair for 6 months. After playing a lot of Counter-Strike 1.6, I realized it's probably good to do something that is a bit more of an investment. And at those early days of Photoshop CS2, I learned how to do a few things. And voila, the result of that is coming on your devices with every episode. It's a multimedia content curation that I am doing. Thank you very much. With skills I acquired one half a lifetime ago. The skill level didn't really progress since then. So, yes, if you haven't seen so far, just know that its episode comes with a little special Photoshop, which is probably me holding two things. But coming into some news, we finally made it. If you're listening this podcast more or less when it came out, we made it into daylight savings time, which is this magical thing that happens to not everywhere in the world, but in a lot of countries and in a lot of the listeners of this podcast, which is that during the last Sunday of March, we get back 1 hour of sun. This is how I like to imagine it. There are so many different ways to try and describe what is happening, but basically, you wake up and instead of 9, the clock shows 10. So you kind of skip 1 hour, which doesn't feel great. If you're sleeping, for example, the clock says that you slept 8 hours, but in reality it's 7. So instead of it being 9, it's now all of a sudden 10. So you feel that you missed one time, that the whole world just skipped one time forward. But instead of losing one time, 1 hour, I really like to think of it as gaining 1 hour, because we are gaining 1 hour of sunlight. So before that, the sun would set at 5:30 p.m. and now automatically that is 6:30 p.m. So by going 1 hour ahead, we extend the available sunlight. So this is cool. This is amazing. We made it through the winter. For me, this is a big checkpoint since I started living in Berlin, because literally 1 more hour of sun in the day can make such a big difference. And it's also an hour which is exactly right after working hours for those working 9 to 5. So if someone told me we got an extra hour of light between, 5 a.m. and 6 a.m., I wouldn't care as much. But getting 1 extra hour of daylight exactly at the 6 and 7 p.m. mark, this is divine. So I don't know what you have going on or if things are not working out, but at least for the vast majority of you, we're getting some more daylight. By the way, the daylight saving time, which is a completely fabricated thing, it's also pretty recent. A quick wiki on it. It was first introduced in Europe during World War One. And why was it introduced? Why would someone think, hey, let's just change the clocks, because why not? It was actually a way to conserve fuel by extending the daylight hours for activities like war production and doing war things. Instead of using electricity for illuminating everything, it was just decided to change the clock. Germany and Austria were the first countries to adopt daylight saving time in 1916, and then other European nations followed. such as the United Kingdom at the time and France. And yeah, the overall primary goal was to make better use of the natural daylight and reduce energy consumption during the war. After the war, many European countries continued with standardization and widespread adoption occurring later in the 20th century. For me, March daylight saving time feels like I am a bit liberated out of a cage and I can run in the fields again. And when it comes back in October, if I'm not mistaken, which is the exact opposite, then we lose 1 hour of sunlight in an already diminishing sun situation because in the winter it starts getting darker earlier and earlier, and then October comes and it's like someone says, you know what? I know it has been hard for you for the day getting smaller and smaller, but I think you are ready to just get this big kick in the balls and cut 1 hour on top of all the mini cuts that have been happening. And this is how very quickly in November and December it's dark already. Very, very early. Too big of an intro. We have 1 more hour of light. World War I is why we have it, and saving money somehow. There's a lot of debate if it still makes sense to be switching back and forth in the 21st century, while not everyone in the world even does so, but we have it. It's here. Thank you, Sean. Let's get going. Another small thought from the week. I was looking at a meme page and I felt personally targeted. There was this type of man holding a sign type of meme, and the sign said, "Not everyone needs to have a podcast." And I seriously thought, oh my God, why is Instagram serving me these memes? This feels so specific. Seriously, I gave it a bit of thought. I like taking in this type of criticism or having the inner dialogue. I realized I actually disagree with that banner that said not everyone needs to have their own podcast. And I'm not saying that everyone should have, but it's not that not everyone needs to have a podcast. It's that not everyone needs to listen to everyone's podcast. But the act of making a podcast or whatever it is that you're making, I feel that creating, expressing, I don't know, exposing yourself in this way or just getting uncomfortable, I think everyone should do that. Trying to find your voice and to put some of your thoughts down doesn't mean that it needs to be a podcast. It can be a discussion with some friends or new people that you meet. It could be writing your diary or your crush or making a stupid collage or some sort of drawing. The only argument I see is that there is an overload of available information out there, but I think we're way past that. I think that if someone takes the time to make a podcast, then they can have it. Was that me feeling targeted? Maybe. But yeah, if you heard episode number 1, I said if I can do a podcast, then everyone should do a podcast. It's quite simple today with the available tools, and not everyone needs to listen to it. Besides the one person I'm torturing in my basement, he needs to listen to it every single day. I have a few things I want to share today. They're a bit cherry picking left and right, and actually, one of them came from one of you, one of this podcast's great listeners. And this one comes from Sherry, and it's about a great news article talking about a person who has renamed themselves to literally anybody else and is running for the 2024 elections. Now, just for me to repeat that, a person changed their legal name, and their new name, the name they legally changed their name to, is, quote, literally anybody else. End quote. You have to respect the dedication of someone to pull something like that to make a point of the dire situation US politics are at. With US having a two-party system, 63 of US adults actually agree that the two-party system, the Republican and Democratic parties, do such a poor job of representing the American people that a third major party is needed. There are some very tiny third parties, but it's almost impossible from the way the system is set. And historically, third party candidates tend to lose because of how the country's two-party system has it. But this brave man, 35 years old, who is teaching math in the 7th grade and is also an army veteran, did this move out of frustration. So now his name is literally anybody else. He will need 113 signatures from non-primary voters in Texas to make it as a presidential candidate in the ballot. So let's see if he can do that. He certainly made it to a lot of headlines. Imagine that person getting a speeding ticket, being pulled over by the cops asking, okay, what is your name? Literally anybody else. I would love to see the dash cam of that. The second piece of news comes from the world of Taylor Swift. And let me tell you, I know very little about Taylor Swift. I am not a Swiftie, but I picked up on this little detail that I found pretty smart and I wanted to share with you. Apparently, Taylor Swift, she has been re-recording her old albums. So she's recording again all of her old albums, and sometimes there are maybe tiny differences, an extra beat every now and then, or one or two changed lines of lyrics. But why is she doing that? And the short answer is she's doing it to stay in control. Because basically the rights of her songs did not belong to her, especially during the early years of her career. The types of contracts that artists are signing basically give the master rights to the recording company and to the producers, which later down the road means that there is a type of ownership that they have, a type of power that restricts the freedom of the artist. So yeah, when she was signing the first time, 2005, she signed up with one records company, and that contract expired in 2018, so 13 years later. When that contract has expired, she switched labels. She went to Universal Republic Records, but the previous company owns the masters, the original recordings of her first 6 albums, which is a typical thing. Many recording deals include that. Of course, in her new contract, she has made sure to secure ownership of her future recordings and masters. And this is something you can do when you get more famous. You're a bigger name, you can negotiate your contract, and it comes with time. But here's what happened. So her previous recording company was sold to a private equity group, which is owned by a powerhouse music manager person, and he then sold her masters to another company. But somehow one of these owners of the rights to the songs was someone called Brown, who manages Kanye West and Justin Bieber. And Taylor Swift had said that he repeatedly bullied her. And this is someone who treated her really, really badly in her career. So she decided and she promised to re-record all of these original 6 albums, and this time she would have the recording and the masters under her control. So basically, anyone who hits play on an old version of Taylor Swift's early songs will be paying, or the money at the end of the day will be going to this Brown person, the nemesis of Taylor Swift. And for all of the albums that she will record again, which will have the exact same titles and same names. The only difference is a parenthesis, Taylor's version on the name, just to know whose version you have, are the ones that will be giving the royalties to her. And I find this ridiculously funny. I like it as a power move because it's very known that for artists, when you are making your first steps, when you're going for your first contract and first deals, of course, everyone is going to try and fuck you over and having to pay royalties for the rest of your life, forever and ever, to a recording company that doesn't let you use your songs as you want. Seems to be one of the ways that the industry is establishing itself. So I think only someone like Taylor Swift could do this because she has a huge fan base. She went public with this and said how she hates that this fund manager now owns all of the rights for her songs. And she even said her plan to record everything again to give her fans the ability to listen to these songs in a version that benefits her and not her bully. So this is Taylor Swift. This is why she is re-releasing her old albums. She's doing it because she's re-recording them, and she is re-recording them to get all of the rights for herself and not have to be sold left and right like a stock or a share from investors to investors and hedge funds. I guess good for her. A last tiny thought I will share is that I feel that there are a lot of things that make me feel old. Things I need to keep in mind, like doing my taxes or paying tickets or keeping a grocery list. So this time I have something that actually made me feel young again, which is a feeling I hadn't felt so actively for a long time. I had the joy of going to a concert of a Greek artist, Yannis Agelakas, who visited Berlin for a tour. This is a singer from a band of my youth. And there is this crazy thing. It almost feels like a drug or like a metaphysics experience when you can connect very deeply with something from your past. This can happen in many ways and it's usually sensual. It can be, have you ever smelled something and immediately hits a nerve in your brain and you remember that smell from a very specific time in your childhood and in your past lives? Or the same thing can be with a specific taste of a recipe that your mother or your grandmother or your grandfather, whoever, used to make, and you taste it many years later and it takes you right there. And the access you get to that former self of yours, the access to that feeling, to that time, to that era, happens almost like putting a plug back in the electricity. It comes to you almost like a bit of a shock. And this is the beautiful thing with music because music is such a sensory thing. It's, of course, hearing, it's the melody, but it's also the words and the lyrics. And it's so well connected with moments, with memories, with eras of our time. And I had forgotten how powerful that can be. By the way, there is also this tip. If you're going for a trip somewhere or if you're doing some sort of a journey, one of the great ways to make memories last is to listen to a new album in that place. So pick a brand new album that you have an eye out for or just something new, and it will create this very strong connection between this particular album and your experiences going through that. And if I ask you about some of your favorite albums, I'm sure that you can connect right away with your past self and listening to that and making your thoughts at that time and your worries of that time. This is the beauty of music. So anyway, if you have a new trip, consider listening to a brand new album for some long lasting memories, or just take a lot of photos and upload them on Instagram. It will remind you after 1 year, 2 year, 3 years. That I guess also works, but it's nice to use our brains, not only our eyes. Long story short, I went to that concert and I felt the youth Hermes. I connected with myself at 15 years old and 16 years old, and I also connected with the view I had around life and emotion and my feelings, how I felt about myself through this music, through these lyrics. And as some of my favorite songs were being played that I hadn't listened to almost 15 years, I did something that I haven't done in a long, long time. I went all in. You know, at the center of a concert where people are just making a sort of a pit and like dancing a bit more ecstatically and touching a lot, left and right, you're bumping with others, you're mixing with the crowd. I felt the need to go and be one with the crowd and be taken away from the music. This is not heavy metal or anything like that. This is probably closer to a rock type of band. So don't imagine that I was fighting anyone in there. It was very much a happy bunch of people just dancing and hugging and feeling that energy because I felt I have more energy in my body than my body can take. And this is something as an adult, this is not a feeling that you get that easily. So I had a beautiful time. It was nostalgic, it was energetic, It felt very real. I was not recognizing myself. Being the person with the highest energy in the room is a bit unusual to say, especially when that has to do with physical activity and dancing and moving. But that was lovely. If you were in that live for any reason, thank you. I hope we hugged and danced together and felt together. Okay, next up, I have a few space stuff. In space news, there is a total solar eclipse happening. This is when the sun gets completely blocked by a celestial body. It becomes the night for a bit. This is not happening in Europe, though. This is mostly for North America. You can look it up for the exact path. And this is because of how things move in space. This is not something that you can see all around the globe. There is basically a path. And if you are on that path, that's when the things line up in the sky in a way that the sun will be blocked. So if you happen to be in the US, have a look for the eclipse happening on April 8th. And for us in Europe, we will have one in 2026, passing a bit through France, I think, Spain, Portugal, somewhere there. There is a really good map from a website called eclipsewise.com that shows all of the upcoming solar eclipses on the world map. By the way, if you think the humans over the centuries and the millennia, and looking at a map like that, a map that shows all of the solar eclipses that are happening in the next 10 years, and seeing in the map where they happen, where those paths get drawn, you can sort of imagine that there is like a specific line of countries and towns and cities that will get to experience this, while a few hundred kilometers away that would not be visible. If ever we become eternal beings and we can cruise through time and space and just explore the entire universe the same way we look at our timeline in our photos and our phones, I would love to have a time machine and go and witness people across the centuries and civilization witnessing solar eclipses, because that must have been wild. And of course, there might have been some theories to what is happening, but the more back you go in time, the more madness and chaos and paranoia I'm sure that would be ensuing. The wrath of the god is upon us. People hiding and screaming and shouting, trying to explain and writing down theories on what needs to happen for this to stop, or what happened to cause this. This must have been truly terrifying, living all of your life with the sun coming up and setting down. I think I would have find the biggest cave to hide and wait for the end of time. And by the way, thinking how crazy it must have been to experience a lunar eclipse or a sun eclipse is not something that hasn't been taken advantage of. Actually, throughout the history, explorers have been tricking people by predicting eclipses. The history of explorers using their knowledge of celestial events to impress or manipulate indigenous people is very well documented. So, just an example, during the age of exploration, European explorers often did use their understanding of astronomical events to their advantage when encountering new cultures. Think of this, it was a tactic of almost war. Like they would predict events accurately, and this will lead them into being seen as powerful or even godlike figures by indigenous people. And there is a very famous example for this one, no other than Christopher Columbus. Christopher Columbus, during his voyages to the Americas, he used his knowledge of a lunar eclipse to persuade the indigenous people of Jamaica to provide his crew with provisions. So Columbus knew that the lunar eclipse was imminent. And listen to what he did. He went there and he said, "Hey, listen, natives, my God is angry. My God is angry because you are not helping my man. So I'm warning you. I'm warning you that the moon will be hidden by his anger. And then the eclipse happened. Imagine that. The natives were amazed and promptly supplied Columbus and his crew with what they needed. And this is something you can look up further if you're interested. Predictions of celestial events, when some realized how they can exploit that, have been used to gain advantages during interactions with indigenous populations. And even though that sounds cool, it's also extremely unfair, right? It is part of this behavior that contributed to the spread of European colonialism and the further exploitation of indigenous people. So when I say imagine how an eclipse might have been hundreds of years ago, imagine a time where it was fair for everyone, not knowing their shit about what is happening, and not the moment where some part of the world gained an advantage in science, technology, and information. And what did they do? They used that advantage for more gain. But anyway, last up in space, we have the James Webb Telescope that brought in yet another discovery. It turns out that this powerful eye in the sky has spotted something quite familiar, and that is alcohol. So ethanol, which is the alcohol found in our favorite beverages or not, has been found in deep space around two youthful stars. And these stars are so young that they haven't formed planets yet, but they are on the track of doing so. What's intriguing is that these complex organic molecules, like ethanol and other compounds like formic acid or acetic acid, which is found in vinegar, they are there now, so they could one day become part of planets and asteroids as these youthful stars continue and are on the track of forming planets. So this discovery opens up a world of possibilities around the origins of life's building blocks and how they might have traveled through space. How did the James Webb Telescope discover that? Well, it has spectrometers, which is allowing us to peek into the different distant cosmic regions and actually see chemical compositions around stars and planets. How cool is that? Let's see what more exciting updates we get from the world of astronomy and space exploration. Thanks, James Webb. Let's move on. By the way, it's Easter time now, at least for a big part of the world. As a Greek, I'm Orthodox, which means that we have a bit of a delayed Easter. Taylor Swift had a debate and she parted ways with her old firm. This is basically what happened with Orthodox Christians and the Catholic and Protestant Church. I'm doing this very weird analogy because Easter just happened, but as a Greek, we celebrate the Orthodox Easter that for some reason happens at a different time. And the reason is that the churches had a fight with each other and decided to go separate ways. One pope introduced a new calendar, and some people said, yeah, we will follow this. Then the Eastern Orthodox Church said, no, we'll continue to use the old one. And basically, the only difference is that the Orthodox Easter usually occurs later, sometimes by several weeks. And the methods that the two Easters are calculated are also different. So, for anyone interested, Western Church follows a calculation established in 325 AD, quite a long time ago, which ties Easter to the first Sunday after the first full moon following the vernal equinox. That's quite a complicated way. And in contrast, the Orthodox Church calculates Easter based on Julian's calendar, timing of the vernal equinox, and the phases of the moon, following a similar but not identical method. Now, to me, this sounds extremely confusing. I'm very happy that at least the calendars are the same. Every single thing is exactly the same on how the year works. Besides, when is Easter? And for that, I have Google. So every year I can Google when is Easter 2020, whatever, and then I can know. So thank you for all of this. People who go into counting the phases of the moon and the Sundays to follow, so we can all finally get a break from work. And these are 4 to 5 days of work. I know that it may sound shallow, but for me, it's a great gift. So I'm thankful to all the celestial beings and the powers of be for granting this to us and teaching us that no matter how many days you get, when that last day comes, you will wish you had just one more day off and everything would fall into place. Thank you so much for sticking around from the daylight savings time to Taylor Swift and how she's taking ownership of her albums by doing this paradoxical thing of recording everything back in place. The wild, crazy person who named themselves literally anybody else to run for the 2024 US election, going into concerts, feeling young again, and the beauty of space and James Webb. That's it. Have a great, great week. Ciao.